These are the charges that we have had filed today. The first charge is felony murder, and the possible sentences for a felony murder conviction would be life without parole, or the death penalty.
Charges are announced for the killers of Rayshard Brooks. Is this good for Black America? Let's talk about it, y'all. Middle America. Well, in the continuing circus that is our justice system, we have a police officer who knelt on the neck of a detained person who is showing no resistance whatsoever, who's currently, we believe, being charged with second-degree murder. And then we have a police officer who engaged a suspect. Then we have an officer who engaged a suspect who was displaying violent behavior, who was not compliant with arrest. And all in all, the interaction took about 23 seconds, one of those seconds in which he pulled his weapon and fired. That officer is being charged with a crime that could possibly lead to the death penalty. Officer Rolfe, as we saw in the introduction, is being charged with felony murder. That can lead to 1 to 20 years, life in prison, or even the death penalty itself. And his fellow officer, Mr. Devin Brosnan, is charged with aggravated assault, as well as 2 counts of violation of the oath. Mr. Brosnan is actually going to testify against Mr. Rolfe, which is a first. And the recent fireside that we did, a fireside is where I sit and chat with everybody for 2 hours in a live stream and I field all the questions. We were talking about this among other cases. Now, I'm seeing a lot of folks celebrate this. I'm seeing a lot of folks saying that they're happy about this. And I would just, we've had a lot of vigorous conversation about whether or not the officer should have shot this individual. My personal opinion is, was the shooting necessary? No. But was it understandable? Absolutely. It is clear from the video, I've repeated this over and over again, that the disposition of the police was not to take this man's life. There's a dash cam, the body cam footage for about half an hour, maybe 45 minutes, where Mr. Brooks is talking about his mother just passed, and the officer said, "That's really terrible, I'm sorry to hear that." They give him the breathalyzer, all that jazz. He fails, obviously, because he was ossified drunk. They go in to arrest him, which, by the way, this is one of the 11 counts, is apparently they didn't tell him, they didn't tell him he was being arrested before they put their hand on him or something like that. It's just ridiculous. And then he began to fight them, grab at their weapons. One officer says, "I'm going to tase you." He didn't tase him because he didn't want to, because obviously their disposition was not to do this man harm. He beat the hell out of them, took one of their tasers, and off he went. And he was going to beat them in a foot race. This brother was obviously physically superior to those 2 officers. And if they did not shoot him, he would have went off into the night. Now, ridiculously, many people, including the mayor, are saying, well, then they should have just let him go. Of course, the mayor is a millionaire who lives in a gated community and does not have any danger to her life or her person if there is a violent, belligerent criminal armed with a weapon that can incapacitate a person temporarily, and who is obviously a very physically gifted individual. She wouldn't have to worry about that dude roaming around in her neighborhood in the dead of night. But we're told that the officer should have just let this man go into a neighborhood in doing that. So this officer is now being charged with felony murder, and he could face jail time. Now, for all the people celebrating this, for all the white allies, and I don't use the term social justice warrior as a pejorative, I think we are at war with injustice in our society, and so if you're on the team, I appreciate you greatly. But let me ask you a question, dear listener. It is obvious that the disposition of these cops is not similar to the disposition of Mr. Chauvin. Can we agree with that? Does it make sense to you, dear listener, that this man might face a death penalty because he was trying to not use lethal force, and then in his mind was forced to use lethal force, whereas Mr. Chauvin, clearly with malice aforethought, kept his knee on this dude's neck when there was no possible way that this man was going to do anything to him? Does it make sense to you that this guy is dealing with second-degree murder, but this guy might be facing the death penalty? Does that make sense to you at all? Here's another question for all of you who are celebrating these charges. Think with me for a moment. What would you do if you're a police officer? Now, we know a lot of police officers are quitting, and me personally, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think there are a lot of cops who are used to the certain protections that they have for being law enforcement officers that conceals them from being held to the same standard of law that everybody else is held to. And I think a lot of those retirements or resignations are due to the fact that they're scared to death that the crimes they've been committing, they're now being held accountable. So for the most part, I'm not really worried about these officers resigning. But here's my question. Let's say you don't resign. What message are you hearing from this charge? You know what the message is? If these officers would have showed up and immediately pulled their gun on Mr. Brooks, then this guy would not be fighting for his life, right? Because if they would have showed up and immediately pulled their guns on Mr. Brooks, one of two things would happen. Either A, he would comply, because they would be projecting that they mean business, and his life would be in danger, and he would comply. It is clear from the video that Mr. Brooks knew that these guys didn't want to shoot him, and that's why he went off and did what he did. So either A, he's going to comply, or B, he's going to start fighting them. But if he starts fighting them, they would be justified in killing him because a gun is technically a lethal weapon. Now, I've had a lot of, well, obviously a lethal weapon. I've had a lot of people tell me that a taser is not a lethal weapon, and technically you're right, but I can show you, you're seeing it here, story after story after story of people actually dying from being tased and dying in police custody while they were tased. I'm sure you're seeing the slideshow right now. So no, it is not classified as a lethal weapon, but you can absolutely kill somebody. But it's not technically a lethal weapon. So now here it is. If I'm an officer, I'm going to say, oh, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to roll up and pull out my pistol immediately. You're either going to comply, and if you try to fight me and I kill you, then it's going to be you try to get a lethal weapon from me, and now I killed you, and now I can defend myself. You see? You don't believe me? You don't believe they're thinking that way? Well, there is a video on Facebook that went viral. I think it's up to almost 900,000 views right now. And it's a situation in which 5 teenagers, all of which are under 15 years old, are being held up by a police officer. And before the police officer says a word to them, the following happens.
Walk towards me. Get your hands up. You're going to get hurt. Get your hands up. Get your hands up.
This officer, who, by the way, is in Georgia, Clayton County, which is pretty close to Atlanta, or maybe in Atlanta. Let me know, Alec. This officer in Georgia on Monday, 2 days after the incident happened, soon as he hears this report about these kids, one of them had a BB gun apparently, as soon as he hears a report about these kids, this officer rolled up and immediately brandished his firearm. And when it was shown that none of the kids had the BB gun, did he put the firearm away? Nope. He lowered it into a low resting position. You know, there's some groups that, you know, when they breach, they go high ready, and other groups go low ready. And if you want to know what the correct one to do, it's low ready. You can be a Navy SEAL and go high ready all you want. That's why you keep shooting each other. Different story. But here, the officer immediately shows up with his pistol brandished out. And even after he saw that the kids were unarmed, he still kept his pistol out.
When the officer approached the teens on Monday night, he had his weapon drawn, but Chief Kevin Roberts says once he ascertained they weren't armed, he pointed it down.
Now, why do you think that happen? Well, look, check this out.
When asked if the officer could have used a taser instead of a gun, here's what Chief Roberts had to say.
That's not a fair request.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a fair request at all. Not saying that we know these young men weren't armed, but he did not know. And to ask someone to use a taser when there's a possible firearm present puts you in a losing position already.
But again, we know that even after the officer knew that nobody had firearms, he still kept his pistol out. But did you hear what he said? You're asking us to lose a taser, you're in a losing position already. Now, he didn't mention the situation that just happened 2 days ago, but are you trying to tell me that that wasn't going through brother's head? Of course it was. We have just told these officers, when you're in a hairy situation, instead of going to a taser or your baton, pull your gun immediately so that you can either A, force compliance, or B, you'll have a fighting chance in court. That's what we've just socialized these officers to do. So all of you people, all you white folks who are going, yay, this is great, and all you silly black folks, yay, this is great. What you have just done now is encourage these fools to roll up on us and pull their weapons immediately. And I don't mean their tasers, I mean their guns immediately. Because now, this guy is fighting for his life, and if he would have pulled a gun, he wouldn't be in that situation. If he would have pulled his gun, Brooks would have complied, or he would have tried to assault, he would have tried to grab their deadly weapon, in which case there's no way in the world that anybody could convict him. Now, look, this guy is in Atlanta. He's going to be tried by a jury of his peers. He's in a black community. Look, I don't shed any tears for police. I think I said yesterday in the fireside that policing is a corrupt institution, and that there are no good cops in the sense that you can be good, but then when you enter the institution, you immediately get corrupted. We had an LEO in our forum who said that the blue wall of silence is a real and legitimate thing, and that they were able to get rid of one bad cop, but that's because the entire shift agreed to get rid of the guy. So it is a corrupt institution. I have no love or pity in my heart for the police. I just think this is a horrible strategy. This is a horrible misuse of the current power that we have. And it is going to backfire on us on the street and in the polls, because the 20% of people that jumped in favor of Black Lives Matter in 2016, the number was about 47% of people who supported Black Lives Matter. And in 2020, that number jumped 20%. In 2016, I think the number was like 67 or something like that. In the Pew Research for white Democrats. So what you can see, here are certain attitudes to Black Lives Matter. This is 2016 now. In 2016, 43% supported the movement, 18% strongly supported it. In 2020, you can see here, 67% of the folks supported it, at 38% saying that they strongly support it. Here, again, you can see among white Democrats, right? You can see here that white Democrats, 2/3, 64% supported Black Lives Matter. And here you see in 2020, 91% of Democrats and Democrat leaders say they support the movement. 40% of Republicans do in 2020, and in 2016, I think the number for Republicans was 20. So we've had exponential growth in the support of the Black Lives Matter movement, and most of it I attribute to the George Floyd situation, where white folks were like, holy shit, they just killed this guy in 9 minutes and he was clearly not doing anything to them. You know, Philando Castile, you could say, well, the guy was scared, he had a gun in the vehicle. Eric Garner was kind of like an instantaneous thing. It's a big black guy and he was kind of resisting arrest. George Floyd wasn't resisting arrest at all, and they killed the guy slowly and tortuously for about 9 minutes. And finally white folks said, Whoa! And then you know what happened? They started taking to the streets, and then they started getting treated like by the cops the same way we get treated by the cops. So you got the septuagenarian get his head cracked open. He currently can't talk, by the way, can't walk. All you crazy Trump conspiracy people. This guy has his skull cracked open. He can't walk. White dude. And then we've got Officer Vincent Diodario, whatever his name is over there in New York, who shoved this girl, sent her flying, and concussed her. Her head bounced off the ground like a basketball. And then he and his boss kept on moving like nothing happened. So white sentiment was like, wait a second here. I think these Negroes are telling the truth. And now, this happens. You think that 20% of folks that started supporting this is going to support this nonsense? You think that these white folk who are supporting the movement would want the police to let some dude run rampant in their neighborhood? Who's an obviously physically gifted individual with a deadly weapon? Not a deadly weapon, I'm sorry. A weapon that can kill and incapacitate. You're supposed to just let that guy go. Because they weren't going to catch up to him. You think that these 20% of white folks who switched between 16 and 20, these white Republicans who went from 20% support to doubling the support, you think they want Rayshard Brooks in their neighborhood at 12 o'clock at night running around with that? You don't want that in your neighborhood. I know that for a fact. So now, here is what I predict the fallout's going to be. You're going to see more situation in which cops just show up and immediately pull their guns because the payback that they got for trying to show some restraint. Do you know what's going to happen? I'll tell you what's going to happen. You're going to see more videos like this. This was 2019. This was 2019. Watch what happens.
That ain't what you told me. Give me.
Ram, please. Ram, please. Please don't do that. Don't do that.
Get on the ground.
Don't do that.
Get on the ground.
Don't do it. Just wait till somebody come, Ram.
See what happened? This brother resisted arrest. This cop knew that he didn't want any smoke with this brother physically, because we are the original man. And he immediately pulls out his weapon. Now, isn't that what don't we want these people to go to something non-lethal? Isn't that what we're asking these officers to do? Why you immediately got to pull the gun out? Shorty saying, you ain't got to do all that. You ain't got to do all that. Blah, 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 blah. This brother was going 101 and a 60. That's called criminal speeding. And so the cop decided he was going to take him in. You can see in the video, the guy says, you ain't arresting me. And the cop was like, oh yeah, I'm arresting you. You did criminal speeding. You put other lives in danger. And when he tried to arrest brother said, get off me. And the cop was like, okay. No. You see how calm the officer was? He's like, okay. You know, he did his 2 strides. He got a 6 feet distance and he put the weapon out there. Now, I don't want officers to immediately go to these weapons. But you know what? Nobody died in the altercation and that cop still has his job. This lady put this all over Facebook, and the cop went away with his life and his pension. And the reward that this officer got for doing what we asked him to do is now he's fighting for his life in court. Play chess, people. This is not good strategy for us. We are encouraging a certain kind of behavior. When you riot and destroy shit and make life a living hell because of a Trayvon Martin or an Eric Garner or a George Floyd, this makes sense because there's a certain kind of behavior that we're trying to disincentivize people to display. So when you kneel on a George Floyd and then the entire country erupts in fire, that forces even people like Donald Trump to have to start considering police reform. So you're disincentivizing them to do this horrible behavior. But when an officer displays amazing restraint and doesn't immediately go to his lethal weapon, he only goes to his lethal weapon at the last possible moment, and then you make him fight for his life, you are disincentivizing them going to any other weapon. They're gonna pull the weapon. Did you notice how gangsta brother was? You ain't touching me, and it goes like that. And immediately as he saw the gun, he put his hands in the air, he stopped moving, he was compliant. So now we're socializing these officers. Hey, if you want to keep your life and your pension, just pull the gun immediately on these Negroes. They're too strong. Most of us one-on-one can't deal with any of these black folk. Just pull a gun on them. This is terrible. This is terrible, and I'm not even going to shoot a video on the Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben nonsense. Lady Antebellum, whatever, stupidity. I'm not even going to touch that nonsense. This, however, is dangerous, and it's going to result in more black people being traumatized, and it's going to result in more police officers immediately going to the lethal weapon because they don't want to end up like Rolf. And by the way, his own partner is testifying against him. What in the world? Look, our culture's changing with policing. That is a good thing. We, and when I say we, I'm specifically talking about black people. We do not know how to wield power. We don't know how to play chess, and it's going to hurt us. This is bad for our movement. This is terrible for our movement. Terrible. Love your neighbor. Take care of each other. Middle America, we are the media. Till next time, guys.